Hi, everybody. My name is Alexis Eykel, and I am the Landlord Engagement Specialist here at Tacoma Housing Authority. And I am very excited. Today we have Nancy Shattuck and Russ Alarcon from the Fair Office outreach team at the City of Tacoma. And they're going to be talking about screening processes and fair housing in the City of Tacoma. We are going to record the first part of the webinar. They're going to go through their presentation, and then we are going to open it up for questions and answers. And during the question and answer time, we're going to pause the recording. And I'm going to hand it over to Nancy and Russ. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, thank you, Alexis. I'm going to share my screen. So today my name is Nancy Shattuck, and I'm with the City of Tacoma Office of Equity and Human Rights, and we are on the human rights side, and I'm here with Russ Alarcon to share today about discrimination or potential discrimination in the screening process. So we are going to be having this lunchtime series over the next few months, and we'll be meeting the second Thursday of every month, and I just wanted to share the other topics that we're going to be covering. And at the end of the presentation, we are going to be sharing our contact information. So if there are any additional topics that you're interested in, please reach out to us and let us know so that we can continue to have these monthly sessions and share information with the community about what we're seeing. So we're going to do just a quick little intro on what is fair housing. And so fair housing is the right to choose housing free from unlawful discrimination. And so we have laws that protect us both federally and locally for folks to not be discriminated against when it comes to housing. So we're looking at rentals, sales, lending, and also with insurance. And the idea is that everyone should have access. And it's key that people have a roof over their head and everything that they need. We also want to just talk about what protected classes we have. We have our federally protected classes, which you can see on the left, which is our race, color, religion, national origin, sex, handicap, and familial status. And then in our right-hand side, you can see our more local, so state of Washington, and then specific to the City of Tacoma. We do have a general kind of fair housing 101 that we offer, that we do go more into this. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about application and screening. So we're not going to talk a lot about these individual protected classes, but if ever there was a question, again, we encourage folks to reach out to us. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're going to be talking about application and screening today. So first off, know that every owner and manager that offers residential property for rent should be screening applicants prior to renting their property. We understand that written screening criteria helps property owners and managers attract qualified applicants and identify applicants who do not qualify. The idea here, though, is to avoid claims of discrimination. And so we want to be sure that any screening criteria is applied to all applicants and that the first applicant to meet those criteria should be the ones to be accepted. And we always recommend that owners have written screening policies reviewed by an attorney prior to implementation. So the information that we'll be sharing today are just generalizations. If there's specific questions about a policy that you have on site, you can reach out to us, or you can also reach out to your local bar association or your specific attorney just to make sure you're getting good information. Right. So today we're going to focus in on a few different types of denials that we see in the screening process. These are the most common ones. There's obviously other denials that can happen, but since this is a short webinar, we just want to be sure to focus in on some things. So the idea with discrimination is that you're treating somebody differently based on one of those protected classes that we previously reviewed. So today we're going to talk about source of income, which is a protected class here in the City of Tacoma. We're going to talk about national origin, so the use of a social security number. And then also we're going to talk about criminal history. And we're going to do a short little snippet about domestic violence victims. We're going to have a more in-depth discussion about domestic violence in October. So we're just going to do a short intro to that today. So per our Tacoma Municipal Code, source of income is defined as benefits or subsidy programs, which include housing assistance, public assistance, emergency rental assistance, veterans benefits, Social Security, supplemental security income, or other retirement programs, and other programs administered by any federal, state, local, or nonprofit entity. So source of income does not include anything derived from an illegal activity or manner. And that's directly from our code. And so these are some things that we have heard that happen out in the community that could be examples of discrimination. So for example, we don't take people on SSI, which is Social Security. 2-year steady employment required. Each roommate, so that's the important part there, has to make 3 times the rent. I found that people on Section 8 don't fit well here. And then we have some other examples there. There's also been times where, like in writing, it would say, like no Section 8 or no housing choice voucher. So these are things that if our office was contacted and a complainant described an interaction like this, it could be considered an inquiry that we would then investigate.
No. Well, actually, I haven't. I'm the investigator here at City of Tacoma, and I just recently filed a complaint on behalf of an individual that went to an apartment complex here in the City of Tacoma and was denied because they said they don't accept housing choice vouchers or Section 8 vouchers. And so she chose to want to file a complaint. So it is a real thing. And it's becoming more problematic, more common to hear these over the last month or so. We've been hearing a lot more about this going on.
And so we want to talk a little bit about some policies or practices that might constitute discrimination. And then we're going to go into what a best practice would be. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you shouldn't be doing, and then talk about what we would hope to see you doing. So for example, denying a rental application when there is a lawful source of income. And so for example, if someone has a Section 8 voucher, that should be included as an income source. So thinking about if they potentially receive some other income source, whether they are employed or if they get Social Security or any other benefit, and then also the Section 8 voucher would also be included in their income. Another thing that we've seen is, specifically asking, oh, well, do you get government assistance or are you receiving Social Security, and then just denying their application. Remembering too in fair housing that advertising is something that could see a potential charge. So even if you're not specifically saying it to an applicant, but if you're advertising that says no Section 8 included, that would be something that could be considered a discrimination claim. Also stating that if you do have a rent controlled unit, that stating that the Fair Housing Act doesn't apply to those, because Fair Housing Act applies to, most of our housing that we see. And then also thinking about any new folks so stating that the Fair Housing Act only applies to new voucher holders, but not existing tenants with vouchers. So just knowing that any policy applies to all of your residents.
And this source of income can be very diverse. There are lots of organizations in the City of Tacoma that are in place and have funds to help individuals pay their rent. Just had a conversation. She's still wondering if she's going to file a complaint or not, but her church offered to help her pay her rent and it was denied. So that form of the source of income, in quotes, can come in many different forms and from many different organizations.
So now that we've talked about what we would hope you're not doing, we're going to talk about what we would like to see as a best practice. And so first off, housing providers have a right to set financial and credit qualifications. And it's a process that is going to assure that you're going to have an applicant that's a good tenant. Like, we obviously recognize that, we want property managers to be able to manage their properties in such a way that folks are paying. And knowing that qualifications and inquiries must be applied equally to all applicants and must not be influenced by, and there's a list of some of the protected factors. And again, knowing that you're applying them equally to all applicants. And that during the application process, that the landlord should carefully distinguish between legitimate questions about a tenant and then potential discriminatory ones that might violate fair housing law. And also, Tacoma Municipal Code prohibits housing providers from asking direct or indirect questions that may reveal a person's protected class. So thinking about what you ask and how you ask it, and if it's something that is necessary for you to run your business. Okay. So we're going to move on to talking about Social Security numbers, and specifically relating this to national origin discrimination. So landlords are allowed to request identity documentation and conduct inquiries to determine whether a potential renter meets the criteria for a rental, as long as that process is applied to all potential renters. So for example, singling out someone to provide information about their immigration status would be unlawful discrimination. For example, asking Mexican immigrants to provide proof of immigration status, but not asking that of all applicants, would violate the Fair Housing Act. Also, requiring that applicants have a Social Security number does exclude prospective tenants based on national origin. So you can request a Social Security number to do the credit and background checks, but know that you have to be able to accept other forms for verifying their income or their credit. It might create more steps, but it's something that would be considered reasonable to ask of you. And so there are people who reside in the United States in a documented way that wouldn't necessarily have a Social Security number. So thinking about someone who might be here on an extended tourist visa, or there's other immigration statuses that might create a situation where someone would get the individual tax number, which we call an ITIN, rather than a Social Security number. So it's important to recognize that just requiring a Social Security number, because you have to be a citizen or a legal permanent resident or someone with a work permit to access that, would be potentially discriminatory. And then the next topic we wanted to talk about in relation to screening was specific to criminal backgrounds. And so the HUD has released guidance about the Fair Housing Act, and the HUD website is full of information if you wanted additional context around why criminal background screening is a topic of interest. But knowing that our criminal legal system does have disparities when it comes to African Americans and the Latinx population, and that there is an unequal rate of arrest convictions and harsher sentencing, this idea that using, like crime-free, well, not crime-free housing, but saying like no criminal history allowed, it could create a disproportionate burden on certain protected classes. So specifically race or national origin again. And so it's important that we don't create barriers to obtaining housing. And, many formerly incarcerated individuals have paid their debt to society, and the idea that they continue to face penalties outside of the court, we just need to consider that and what's appropriate. Where did my mouse go? There we go. Maybe. So the guidance that HUD released, they released some in 2016, and then they gave some updates in 2022. So the prohibitions are around denying housing based on arrest records. So the idea of, so there's an arrest record and then there's a conviction record. And just being arrested doesn't mean that you've been convicted and that you haven't been found guilty of something. And so the idea of denying someone just for being arrested isn't appropriate. Also, blanket bans on anyone with a criminal record. So knowing that crimes have different degrees, we see gross misdemeanors and also felonies. And then also there's different types of crimes. So there's crimes against people and crimes against property. And then also thinking about how long ago a criminal act occurred. So the idea is that a landlord must consider individuals on a case-by-case basis and evaluate the nature and the severity of the crime and consider the length of time that has passed since that crime was committed. And then make a determination based on facts and evidence and not just a perceived threat. So then thinking about, well, when we do see criminal history, what would be a basis for a denial? Individuals can be legally denied housing if their recent criminal history makes them dangerous and is a risk to other tenants or neighbors. So those threats should be substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory in supporting that denial. And you must show that the housing policy accurately distinguishes between criminal conduct that would be a risk, right? So thinking about how long ago did a crime occur? Is it more than 7 years ago? Was it a gross misdemeanor? So was it something that went through a municipal or district court, or was it a felony? And then, there are 2 permanent bans that HUD regulates and allows in federally assisted housing, such as registering as a sex offender or manufacturing methamphetamine on a federally assisted property. I think the idea here is have the conversation with the potential tenant. So some examples that could be considered discriminatory that we've encountered are such as a housing provider not renting to a tenant because they served time in prison for a robbery or a drug possession from 30 years ago, and they've had no criminal history since then. Or if a housing provider automatically discards an applicant from a potential renter, saying that they've been convicted of a felony, but not asking those follow-up questions like, what was the felony? How long ago did it happen? Also, a housing provider using a person's criminal history to deny housing as a means to discriminate on another basis. So for example, well, here I listed out sexual orientation, disability, or national origin, but really any of the other protected classes. And then also if an individual has a criminal record due to a past drug addiction, but they've successfully completed a rehabilitation program, any kind of drug addiction is considered a disability if that person is clean and sober and has successfully completed a program. So that would be something that could fall under reasonable accommodations or reasonable modification.
And we're not saying that current drug users or substance abusers are protected. That's not a disability. Being a disability, if the behavior is in the past, they're no longer engaging in the behavior, they're then considered a person that had disability. So you have to be careful. But we're not in any way, shape, or form saying that a current drug user or abuser, substance abuser is protected.
Correct. And then our last topic in association with criminal history is talking about domestic violence. And so victims of domestic violence are not criminals. And so the mass majority of domestic violence victims are women. There are men who experience domestic violence, but since the majority are women, it's important when we have policies that we don't say things like zero tolerance for violence, because that could imply that a victim of domestic violence might be held responsible for violence that occurs against them. And so we just want to be really clear. And again, we're going to have another session talking more about domestic violence and the Violence Against Women's Act, because HUD has come out with some information about that. But we just wanted to cover this in the screening process discussion. Excuse me. Because we have seen housing providers refusing rentals to women or victims, excuse me, based on potentially them being a petitioner and a protection order, or also if they've been listed as a victim of violence. And so it could potentially fall under like a gender claim, since the majority of victims do present as female. So those are the topics that we see the most in our office related to screening process and things that we've seen in the community. And so we wanted to offer some space for if anyone on the webinar right now has any questions, that we could answer those questions. But we also wanted to put our contact information here, that y'all are welcome to reach out if you have any specific situations that you feel like it would be helpful to have a conversation. You can reach out to Russ or myself by email, which is listed there, or also with our phone number. So thank you so much for being present today. And I'm going to stop sharing, and then we can stop recording and open it up for questions.
And I just want to clarify that you guys are there to help educate housing providers that want to know if their policies are discriminatory or not, instead of saying, like, I just want to let folks know that it's a safe space. Like, if they're truly trying to figure out, like, hey, how can I make my policy so they're not being discriminatory towards renters, that they can reach out to you guys without repercussion. So.
Well, yeah, the goal is for me to have no work.
Mhm.
In
Yeah.
essence, you know, we want to do what's best for the participants, for the people that live in the city of Tacoma.
Yeah.
And so part of getting the equation, don't get me wrong, I enjoy tremendously what I do, but we want to make sure that we're not having folks call us saying X happened or Y happened. We want to make sure that we have a nice system in the city of Tacoma where we're all happy and we rent to people and we service people, but in the same respect, we're here for answering questions.
Mm-hmm.
Love giving info, love chatting with people.